Okay, thank you very much, and thanks, Kirsten. Also, I want to thank Steve for asking me to come and speak today and actually share some of my reflections with you. I'm actually going to do that based on quite a lot of the things that I've done since I actually left offshore to go onshore, and I've actually had the opportunity and the privilege to actually spend time in non-oil and gas environments, mining, construction, some manufacturing, nuclear, and actually realised when I went to do that how good we were in the oil and gas industry. We actually spend quite a lot of time beating ourselves up, but you need to leave in order to actually see some of the really good stuff that's going on. But Steve asked me when I came if I was going to come and speak, to actually speak about my own reflections about the elected safety reps, my recollection of that, and my own experience of it. And as Kirsten said, I actually went offshore first in 1982. I actually went offshore as a scaffolder onto the North Cormac hookup. And I remember I'd just actually turned 20 years of age and actually volunteered to go into the shuttle because you get more money for being on the shuttle. And I was actually staying on the DB 100 barge, which was 15 minutes flying time away. And each morning and each night that I went up to the shuttle, I actually got onto the helicopter in my coveralls and was actually handed a life jacket to get tied around about my waist as I went on my way with the rest of my colleagues, and thought it was great because I was getting paid more money for it. And then when I eventually arrived on the Ninian field, a couple of years later, actually recalling and remembering actually watching some of my peers and my colleagues helping some of our colleagues onto the plane because they were drunk in order to actually get to Shetland, to actually then get them onto a helicopter and then to get them offshore. And when I was thinking about that, it wasn't because I'm actually offering up anything judging about these people. That's actually just how it was. The industry had actually absorbed a lot of people that had actually came from shipyards, heavy industry backgrounds, and that was just the norm for people to behave like that. Now, like quite a number of people that's in this room, it's quite frightening to look around the room and see that there's more people of my vintage than younger, but there is quite a lot of younger people here. And they'll be the same as me. They can actually remember what their life was like before 1988 and then what it was like after 1988, after Piper. And the elected safety rep regulations that actually came in off the back of that. What I actually want to major on, as I'm actually going through what I'm speaking about, is what I've actually seen that could potentially make you, as a safety rep, hugely influential and very powerful in being an agent for change. Now, I've got a team of organisational psychologists that actually work for me, and part of the work that we do is actually measuring organisational culture and what it is that actually affects decision making and behaviour. And I was interested with the slide that Steve put up. I think it was the one that he said that he added this morning with the iceberg. And the year before last, we published a paper of every single diagnostic that we had ever done to actually offer up some of the things that we had found through doing them. And one of the major things that was actually found is that when we do the measure and feedback, that those that are in leadership positions or have authority, generally it's over 80% of the time, actually believe that the culture's one maturity level above what it really is, sometimes two. But when you go to the workforce, they always get it right. They always know where it is. In fact, if I've had £1 for every time somebody from the workforce is saying, "Why are we paying you? We could have told you that before you turned up, I would be a wealthy man." So that iceberg is hugely accurate. One of the things that actually sits behind that from a cultural perspective, it's actually useful for you to reflect on. It's actually generally accepted in the social science community that there's two ways that you can influence or change culture in general terms. The first thing is that you can change what people do, and that's called the practices approach. And it involves process, procedures, rules, codified ways of doing things that actually sit in management systems. And the second way of changing is actually called, you can change how people think. And that's generally referred to as the hearts and minds approach. So you've actually got these codified systems, and you've got people that's got influence and authority, and part of their role is to actually socialise and operationalise these so that they actually become living and breathing, and people use them in the way that they're supposed to be used. So when you look at safety reps and their role, there's a lot of language getting used this morning that's quite interesting to me about passion and why people actually volunteer to be a safety rep and why they get involved. I'm going to make reference to that as I go through. And I was reflecting on that because I was a safety rep myself for a short period of time. And I was actually a safety rep when actually nobody knew how to be a safety rep. And it was just a case of actually signing up to do that because it meant that you didn't have to get your tools on for a wee while during that day, and you could actually go to a few meetings. And then as you actually come forward 30 years now, the amount of quality information that's available is unbelievable. In fact, it's actually quite overwhelming. But what you do with it and how you interface with it will make the difference on how influential that you really are. So from a safety rep perspective, there's a few phrases that actually get used, or naming conventions that get used, that are actually useful as long as you actually understand them properly and you can define them. So one of the things that's kind of consistently has been spoken about for a number of years is actually the ability to be able to exhibit chronic unease. There are certain parts that's actually now been defined, that chronic unease is actually competence and concern. So the competence part of it is that you would actually understand your role in the context of where you're exhibiting it, know what's going on the platform or the asset that you happen to be on. So that's that one side of it. And then the second part's the concern part, that you actually do something about what you know. So there's an intent into action piece there. So there's a lot of talk about you need to speak up, you need to actually challenge, you need to talk. But there's certain things that need to be in place that makes it safe for you to be able to do that and comfortable to do that. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But thinking about that competence and concern is actually a really useful thing. That when you get into your role, is that you actually find out as much as you can, as Steph says, about the people as well as what's going on from that perspective. Second one is actually, but I've kind of phrased the style and substance. I think this is maybe a wee bit what Steph was alluding to in her commentary that she was making. You've all came across people like this. So I'm speaking in the context of a safety rep or a supervisor or a manager, and you're actually speaking to somebody that's got a lot of substance. So they know exactly what's going on. They're hugely knowledgeable and they're hugely competent. But their style is absolutely shocking. So as soon as they open their mouth, you lose the will to live and you don't want to listen to them. And then you've got the opposite of that, that's somebody that's just a noisemaker and actually wants to talk about everything. But when you start asking them some questions about what they're talking about, you realise that they don't know what they're talking about. They're completely superficial. But they quite like to be at the front of the room making a lot of noise. So if you're going to be influential and you're going to be effective, it's hugely important that you actually have a balance of both of these. Substance part is closely and clearly linked to the competence part. So finding out about the things that you need to find out about in order for people to be able to approach you and actually use you in the right way. And then your own style, making sure that actually when people approach you or when you get up to speak, that you actually use a particular style that makes people want to approach you. But now what I guess as we actually go further up the food chain in this room, I would probably imagine that the default setting is engineering. Our industry is actually dominated by an engineering mindset alongside a kind of project management mindset, which is based on logical thinking, cause and effect. I spend an awful lot of time working with really brilliant engineers that are constantly trying to problem solve and think. But one of the things that I'm always saying to them when I'm actually feeding back to them, because they get frustrated because they actually don't think that they're being listened to, is actually in this style piece. Because it doesn't matter how smart that you are and how much that you know. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. You can be the smartest person in the room, but if people believe that you don't care, you're talking to yourself. It's hugely important. I actually looked at the Safety Reps Charter, very powerful document. The first part of it actually arrested me when I was looking at it, because it actually starts off with the phrase that the safety reps are going to spend time taking care of each other and caring for what they do. And this whole thing about care can sometimes get wrapped up in an emotional context. And if you actually think about it through that lens, then you're kind of missing the point. Because yes, care can be about people, but it's actually also about the asset as well. How much care is getting spent on maintenance, asset integrity, how much care gets actually used when you're actually conditioning risk assessments, toolbox talks. It's the whole piece coming together. We actually talk about safety and how we want to be role models and exemplars of safety. Safety is an outcome. It's not an input. You don't go and do safety. You do other things that get you safety as an output. So the levels of care that you apply to that input will have a direct correlation in how much safety that you actually generate through yourself, through the tools that you've got available, and how you connect people to those tools. So it's hugely important that we really think about that and actually use the communication skills that you have, the competence that you have, and the knowledge that you have to inform people and actually get them involved in what you're doing. The other thing with chronic unease is one of the members of my team actually designed a tool that measures that. I was fascinated by this when they started to do it, because there's 5 things that actually identify what your level of chronic unease is if you think about it on a bell curve. 3 of them are actually linked to your personality, so you're actually born with them, and 2 of them you can learn. But the 3 that you're born with is actually your propensity to worry, your propensity for pessimism, and how much imagination that you have. And that imagination is specific to safety. So there's actually some flammable or explosive materials over in that corner of the module, and there's somebody over here doing some hot work stuff. So do you actually just focus on what's going on here and keep this, or have you got enough about you that you can connect these 2 together and actually see the big picture? The propensity for pessimism and worry is quite an interesting one, because those of us that are old enough to remember Dad's army and Fraser, we're doomed, everything that happened, he actually thought it was going to turn out really, really bad. It's probably the embodiment of somebody that's got chronic unease from that perspective. And I actually remember with some shame a time when I was offshore where, when the 6-pack first came out and risk assessment actually became the law, we were actually taught to actually invite somebody into the team that wouldn't normally work with you to see if you could get a different perspective, and they could actually maybe identify hazards that you wouldn't, or the risk perception would be in a different place, so they would ask the killer question. When you invited that person in, at the end of the meeting, somebody invariably said, "Don't invite them back." they ask too many flipping questions, like, and they keep holding things up. When if you're actually educated in the subject properly, he should be the first person on the list, or she should be. Because what they're doing is exhibiting the kind of behaviour that makes you pause and think before you actually head off with what you're going to do. So be mindful of that. It's actually okay in your role as a safety rep and being a role model to actually be periodically miserable. Nothing wrong with that, as long as it's in context and you can actually explain the reasons why that you're doing that. And don't become, it's the right word, it's not, I will use, don't become a victim to buzzword bingo, where we actually throw out these comments. Chronic unease became one of them that people spoke about, and I know myself and a number of organisations, really senior people that spoke to me about it. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they would just go blank. It was just the current phrase that was getting used, but very powerful, very important phrase. But make sure that you know what it is, what the intent of it is, and what we're actually trying to do with that. Now, the last thing here is on this particular thing about yourself is about psychological safety. I can get quite emotional and quite fired up when I actually see a group of people like this coming into a room and we actually use words like passion, committed, people that volunteer, people who want to make a difference, to be able to do that. And that's absolutely fabulous. But it's actually well known now. It doesn't matter how passionate you are. If you're actually working in a culture that doesn't value it, then you'll be neutralised. You'll be taken off the chessboard, and you'll be frustrated, and in fact you could end up becoming an annoyance as a consequence of that. Now, Amy Edmondson, her book, it's actually called The Fearless Organisation, about building organisations that don't have fear, is actually, it's one of the most quoted books in the last year since it came out. And I actually picked this bit out of it because it kind of encapsulates that if you want a safety rep to be an exemplar, and you want a safety rep to be the conduit between what's going on at the valve and actually projecting that up to the leadership team and the CEO, and you actually need to prevent them with an environment where it's psychologically safe to behave like that. And that's not the gift of a safety rep. That's a gift of those who lead and manage the assets. So we also know from cultural work that's actually been done that bad news does not make its way up into organisations. It just doesn't. There's filters that actually prevent it. The whole principle and concept about managing by walking around was designed to defeat that, so that those that had authority could get closer to what was going on so that they could become more informed. The greater the levels of psychological safety in an organisation, the more you actually get to hear about. And then obviously it's the role of those that have authority to manage that bad news, if it is bad news, when it actually comes up the way into the organisation. So I want to echo and perhaps amplify some of the things that's been said by the previous speakers, is that in my own experience, certainly in the last 10 or 15 years, I've actually seen more really good safety reps than noisemakers. Sorry, my own Glaswegian phraseology there. Whereas when I was actually trying to fulfil the role myself, there was actually more noisemakers than really good safety reps. And I think that that's actually as a consequence of the information that's available, the ability to educate, people being interested, and actually the connectedness of the technology as well helps. People can get access to information really quickly. But what the key is that when you know what you know, can you turn intent into action? The amount of absolutely fabulous debates that actually go on in locker rooms all over the place that actually only take place in the locker room. because people are no sure whether they can actually take them outside the locker room. Well, whether you like it or not, part of your job is to take it out of the locker room. But how you go about doing that will actually define and decide whether you're listened to. It's really important that you actually pay attention to that. Now, I actually was thinking about today and the fact that I was actually going to get to speak to a whole load of people that actually worked for a living when we came into the room. So therefore, if you're actually going to speak to people that work for a living, it's actually useful that you actually talk to them in a language that's accessible and makes sense. And I actually had a look at an organisation, quite a new organisation. They're quite famous because they actually came into the marketplace and they actually used some disruption technology to try and muscle their way in where other people were being successful, and they just arrived and dominated. And they're one of their main places quite close to here, the Brewdog beer place. A lot of young people within the organisation, absolutely passionate. If you actually go and look at their website, speak to any of their people, they're almost fanatical about what they do. So there's a correlation between how they think and how some of the people in here think. And when we get into the oil and gas space, we talk a lot about values, how values actually project behaviour, motivate it. And I actually took their charter, and I thought it might be quite useful to share it, which hopefully it lands the right way, because this is them actually taking all of the stuff I've been speaking about and boiled it down into a language that they actually want their people to access. And if you actually go up to the Brewdog brewery, these are actually up in the wall all over the place. So, and to me, that kind of exemplifies how you could actually be a really good safety rep. Because when I actually get into organisations and I see the top one, there's plenty of that to be done. Lots of it. Getting better every day is about educating yourself, becoming more informed, being more connected, actually listening to the two safety reps that actually came up and spoke. That's actually more to do with your non-technical skills than your technical skills. How do you communicate with people? How do you collaborate? Quite a lot of the times that I get involved with, and I'm trying to help safety reps in particular places, most of the time they're actually, most of their interactions actually feel like a confrontation rather than a collaboration, and they're in that space. And the one there, the third one, is actually about speak up. There's a paper published last year, it was in the US right enough, where they actually, they went and spoke to a high percentage of the Fortune 500 CEOs and asked them that if they had one thing that they could get that they haven't got, and they would give any amount of money for it, what would that be? And 80% of them actually said that their people would speak up. So in 2018, with all of the technology and everything that we know, we still know that people don't speak up. And whether we like it or not, the reason for that is actually based in trust. Whether people think it's safe to speak up in that regard. And the last one, self-explanatory. It's a phrase that my two daughters use with me when I know that I've stepped outside the tram lines. So it's very... and brings me back in and makes me realise where I should be, where my face should be. But it's quite important for me that we actually speak to people in a language that they understand. This organisation, Brewdog, have absolutely captivated their people. One of the things that we actually talk about as a marker in a culture, it's measured, is that your people are doing what you want them to do even when you're not watching them. And we know there's a direct correlation between people's behaviour to do that and whether the quality of the leadership is actually in place to do that. And this is an organisation that's been measured to absolutely nail that. So, I suppose the last thing, we're actually, I wanted to make a comment about legacy. And the thing about this is if you've actually volunteered to do what you're doing, and you're actually doing the safety reps job, and if you're actually doing it for a self-serving piece that I've ticked a box, it's in my PDR and stuff like that, then generally speaking, it's only you. You've done that for yourself from that regard. But if you actually get into it for the right reasons and you really immerse yourself in it, then your legacy is actually what you'll leave behind. I used to listen on the train when I was going down from Aberdeen, actually heading down to Glasgow. When I started doing what I'm doing at the moment, people would come onto the train, you'd hear them speaking, "Where have you been?" "I've just been on such and such." "All right, what was that like?" Well, the storytelling and the commentary that comes out of their mouth after that is them actually explaining the culture of where they've been. So that would naturally move on to like, well, who was there? So they then actually start talking about who was in charge of somebody that they came in contact with who were there. And what they're actually explaining there is what that person's legacy was on them when they left. That's how they remembered them when they left. So I want you to reflect on that, about your legacy as a safety rep, because the position is 30 years old now. And what an amazing thing today to see this amount of people come into the room because they wanted to and because they want to make a difference. So if you actually only do one term, or you do a couple of terms, what do you leave behind when you go? Because that's how people will remember you. And I've actually put the All Blacks up there because I tend to speak about them if I get the opportunity. Evidenced as being the most successful sporting team in the world ever since the day they were formed in 1912, 1914. We're coming up to the World Cup next month. We'll see if they retain it again for the third time. But I would suggest to you there's a very good book. It's actually called Legacy. And it's actually written about this team and actually about what it is that makes them so good. And there's 15 values or principles that they actually attend to that's actually really quite compelling. One of them is, other teams have started doing it now, but the All Blacks were the first, if not one of the first teams that actually, in order to be able to become an All Black, it didn't matter that you were the best player in your position as a New Zealander. They also measured your character. So if you didn't have the right character, it didn't matter how good that you were from a skill set, you didn't get into the team. So you needed to be able to play as part of a team player. It's some of the legendary stuff that they do to stay connected to each other. So if you get your first cap and you're actually going to play in your first game, what they do is they find the best player currently alive in your position, and he's brought into the locker room to give you your jersey. Because the logic is that if you want to be able to do that later on in your career, you need to be better than what he is. It's about the jersey. It's not about you. It's not an ego trip. It's what you can contribute. So when you start to think about legacy as a team, and then actually start to think about legacy as an individual, then actually start to think about, and this is where it comes back to the playing your part. How are you going to play your part? How are you going to actually execute your excellence? And there's a number of things for me that, and I'll leave you on this, that I would like you to kind of reflect on, is that maybe four main things is be curious, ask questions, find out about what's going on, even out with what it is that you do, and be connected. Step Change and Safety do an absolutely phenomenal job at keeping people connected. It used to get really quite bizarre. There's actually people in here that I've not seen for years that I actually grew up with. I've actually got 4 brothers that actually used to work offshore at the same time as me. Every single one of us actually worked on different platforms and actually worked for different operators. And when we used to get together for a social function, you would have thought that we worked on different planets, because our experience was completely different. And now, with what I know now, that doesn't surprise me, because we were all working in different cultures. When you're being a safety rep and you turn up to events like this and you actually hear about one of your colleagues that's actually allowed to do this and that and the next thing, and you don't feel that you can, then these are the forums to actually find out, how was that possible to do that there? Don't spend all your time actually talking about what you can't do. Find out how those that are doing manage to make that happen. So be curious, stay connected, stay informed. Use the technology, use step change, use all of the people that you're meeting. And I suppose above all is be authentic and be honest. And play your part. Thank you.